Welcome to the Supporting Youth Without Immigration Status, SLI, webinar. Welcome back to day 2 of the 2022 Summer Law Institute's webinar series. Today, we're joined by Justice for Children and Youth. They will be sharing some information on their Childhood Arrivals Support and Advocacy program, and they're going to talk to you a little bit more about that once they get going. But first, some housekeeping items. There are a couple of these that we want to address before we begin. First of all, if you have any questions or comments, please use the chat feature. That should be up and running, or the Q&A function. They both are working right now. Let us know if you can't use those, but it looks like they're working. If there are any links to be shared, Christy's going to pop those in the chat. And the final housekeeping matter is that this presentation is going to be recorded. We will post the video and PowerPoint to our website afterwards, as well as send you a little package of resources that CASA is going to put together for us here afterwards. Okay, I also want to start with a land acknowledgement. So we acknowledge that we're gathered upon the traditional territories of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, Wendat, and Huron Indigenous peoples who are the original nations of this land. In addition, we acknowledge that Toronto is home to a large and diverse Indigenous population. Together, we exist under the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, which pre-existed contact with settlers. This treaty historically governed relations between Indigenous nations, and particularly in reference to physical territorial relations. So it's particularly prescient when we consider the topics we're here to discuss today. The Dish with One Spoon Treaty contemplates our shared responsibility to protect the land, to never take more than we need, and to ensure that we leave something in the dish for others. So with that said, I am very pleased to introduce our speakers. Those you see on screen right now are starting off with Sarah Pohl. She's the director of the Childhood Arrivals Support and Advocacy program, that's CASA. She's asked me to cut her bio, but I just can't do it. Sarah practiced family, employment, and immigration law in New Zealand before moving to Canada in 2002. She has extensive experience in youth justice education and is focused in particular on youth facing personal and systemic barriers to education success. The founder and director of CASA, her former roles include executive director of the Law in Action Within Schools program, that's the LAWS program. She was also the acting director of education for the CCLA, the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, and the director of provincial programs with yours truly, the Ontario Justice Education Network. Nanushan Krishna Pillai, Nanu, is the education and outreach manager of the CASA program. Nanu's background is in public health, youth work, and community programming for young people. His work revolves around creating safer spaces for children and youth to take agency of their own lives. He is inspired by his hometown of Scarborough, where he grew up watching community members engage in development, activism, and mutual aid without institutional support. Danique Lavia is a project assistant, Childhood Arrivals Support and for the Childhood Arrivals Support and Advocacy program, that's CASA again. Danique is in her 4th year of the Law and Society program at York University, and she hopes to one day become an immigration lawyer. Danique has lived experience as a youth living with precarious status and understands the severity of need for access to resources and education for undocumented youth living in Canada. As the CASA program's project assistant, Danique hopes to bring awareness to these barriers and help to close the gap between undocumented youth and access to post-secondary education. So thank you very much. I'm amazed by all your qualifications. I'm proud to repeat those for everybody attending here. And thank you to everybody for joining us today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the team here, and they're going to share their screen and begin their presentation.
Thanks, Bryn. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be in cyberspace with you. I hope that your weather is slightly better than Toronto's. If you're not in Toronto, it's raining here. I'm Sarah Pohl. I'm the director of the CASA program here at Justice for Children and Youth Legal Clinic. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm really happy to be here with my colleagues Nanu and Danique today, and I'm grateful that OJEN invited us. Thanks, OJEN. I wanted to start by introducing the program, CASA, talking about the clinic a little bit. But first of all, I just wanted to pick up a little bit on Bryn's land acknowledgement. Our clinic is based in a similar geographic location as OJEN, so I acknowledge that we too are doing our work here on traditional territories of many First Nations people. But I also want to acknowledge that CASA's work specifically deals with this immigration. We only deal with immigration. So all of our clients are people who are looking to regularise their status in Canada. And obviously Canada's immigration system really is a pretty impressive tool of colonisation. It's a system that speaks to who gets to come to Canada, who gets to stay in Canada, and what they get to do when they come here. And that system itself has, for as long as it's been in existence, really made value judgments about people and their worth to Canada. And many of those value judgments are based on particular aspects of people, such as their race or their class. And in many of the conversations that we have about immigration, it really feels like this very external looking thing. Whereas for many of the conversations that I sit in when we talk about reconciliation, often they feel like a very internal to Canada conversation. And I don't often see the mix. But I think, and I think we here at the CASA program think that this conversation about who gets to come to Canada and who gets to do whatever they want in Canada and who gets to make decisions about who comes to Canada, really should be really firmly and centrally rooted in reconciliation. So I did just want to acknowledge that before we start as well. But in terms of the program, the CASA program actually started out of a separate program, Law in Action Within Schools program, which is essentially a post-secondary access program for young people facing barriers to success in the GTA area. And it was created because we realized that one of the biggest barriers to education success for some young people was the fact that they didn't have immigration status, and it was a really intractable barrier. So the CASA program was founded to make sure that young people had access to a service that was specifically oriented to their needs, not their parents' needs, not their community's needs, but their individual needs. So we provide legal services directly to young people. Most of the young people we work with, all of them came as children to Canada, and most of them had no agency in the decision to come here. So somebody else was obviously making that decision, as parents do. Many of the clients we work with have no knowledge or understanding of how they came here, or what the pathway was, or what their immigration status or applications that were made on their behalf. And many of them actually have no idea until we start working with them about what their current status is or what their legal options are. So we do a lot of making sure young people know what their options are, connecting them with appropriate legal services. Sometimes it's in our clinic, sometimes it's external to our clinic, and also providing navigation services. The immigration system is I'm going to use the word beastly. It's a big, complicated, opaque system that doesn't take kindly to mistakes people may make, and people get, a chance to present cases to immigration, and we want to make sure that the cases that our clients present are as comprehensive and fulsome as possible at the very first opportunity. We also do a lot of work doing outreach to young people, and that's really because our hope would be that a young person could have their immigration status regularised before they finish high school, which would mean that they could go off and do what everyone else in their class is doing, heading off to work or post-secondary studies or whatever they may choose. And that means that young people need to get information about what having no immigration status means as early as possible, and that they can be connected to legal resources as early as possible, because the process takes forever. Many immigration applications are years in the making of the processing. We also recognise that many of our young people clients are members of families. So for some of our clients, they also have siblings or perhaps family members who are also without status. And while we may not provide services to the whole family, full-on legal services, we'll certainly make sure that the whole family, if they're wishing to apply together and their interests align, are connected with legal services, because we know that for a young person to succeed, best that they can have their family here with them if that's a suitable fit for them. So those are the types of things we do here. We're also trying to address big picture issues. So what are the systemic barriers that young people without immigration status face? And how can we move those? How can we move those barriers? How can we start more of a conversation about folks with precarious immigration status? Because we really don't have much of a national dialogue here about young people or children without immigration status. Certainly not when we compare it with situations such as dialogue around dreamers, for example, in the US. So that's what we do, and we do it within Justice for Children and Youth Legal Clinic, which is a specialty legal clinic. I think there's about 75 legal clinics across Ontario. Ontario's got an amazing legal clinic system, and many are geographic, so they serve people in their local community. Our one's a specialty clinic, which means that we work for a particular population, in our case, young people. So Justice for Children and Youth Lawyers will provide legal advice and information to any young person who calls, pretty much on any topic. So if you have a young person facing youth criminal justice questions, immigration, housing, discrimination, children's aid, really school exclusions, school discipline, we take their calls and our lawyers will provide them with advice and then connect them with lawyers either in the clinic or outside the clinic if need be for ongoing representation. We also do a lot of work working with people who work with youth. So we get a lot of calls from teachers or school social workers who are sometimes just trying to figure out, is this a legal problem? And how can I make sure that this young person is connected with services? We generally don't work for parents, we work for the young people, but sometimes for parents, particularly with school access matters, it is the parents who we're dealing directly with. Our services are free. And we do offer a mandate across the province. For most of our work, we go up to the age of 18 or until someone's finished high school. But for the CASA program, our age limit is actually 25. We also have a program called the Street Youth Legal Services, which offers services, a full range of legal services to young people who are unhoused or have precarious housing. And that again goes up to 25. So that's what we do. I think I've almost finished, Nanu, right? But first of all, teachers who I can't actually see, I just did want to congratulate you for choosing to come to the SLI before school even starts, which tells me that you are either panicking about the new school year or you are super keen about the school year, and either one is fine by me. I thought we would start though with a little pop quiz so we could get to know you a little bit better. So I'm going to invite you, please, to pop some questions, pop your answers into the chat, and hopefully some folk can look at the chat for me. So my first question to you, friends, is what school board do you teach in, or what area are you from?
I can man this one. So far, we've got TDSB, very strong. Any challengers? Okay, we've got the OCDSB. I know you didn't poise this as a competition, but I want to see who we have here. Okay, so OCSB, Northern Ontario, and a couple Peels. I see Sean's in there from Peel.
Excellent. Oh, okay.
We've got lots of representation here. TCDSB.
Well, welcome all of you, and I see some familiar faces or familiar names there, so it's nice to see folks who I know there in the chat. My second question is, where, if you had anywhere in the world you could move to and live for 6 months, where would you go to? Winter is coming here, folks. Crete, New Zealand. I think you're being nice to me now, Maureen.
Mexico, Colombia, Greece also.
A lot of Greece, yeah.
Yeah.
Florence or Dublin.
Yeah. I'm planning a trip to Tunisia, so that's on my list at the moment. The reason we, New Zealand, one of the reasons that we put that question in is, we talk about migration, and I think often people think about migration stories as having endpoints. People get here and they're done. But the way we think about migration here at CASA is that, people are what they've been or where they've been in the past, but also to where we're planning on going in the future. And that's certainly a conversation we have when we're with students in classes about migration stories, being constant and people come and go. Oh, hello, Alan Hux. Nice to see you. Okay, and my third question is, what's the first word that pops into your head when you hear the phrase precarious immigration status? And that could be, what on earth is that, if that's okay? Yeah.
Stress. The unknown. True.
Yeah. Yeah.
Shame, uncertainty.
Yeah. These are good answers, and I think that, you know, as teachers, you know, well, all of us here in this room, I think, are people who, you know, have a lot of knowledge and a ton of social capital, and can also recognize that there's a lot we don't know about the immigration status often, and that probably the immigration status is inflicting these kinds of feelings on people. And I agree with you. What we have discovered at the CASA program is, well, part of the things I've discovered at the CASA program is how much I now know I don't know. I started this program really with an understanding of what I thought the immigration experience might be for young people, but the breadth and diversity of immigration pathways has been eye-opening to me, and the ways that young people may find themselves without status or having some kind of precarity is enormous. And the corollary to that is how that lack of status or that uncertainty impacts them in their day-to-day life has been really eye-opening for me. Yeah, so I agree with you. But thank you for playing our pop quiz. I appreciate it. And it's nice to see your names in the chat. But I'm actually going to stop talking now and hand over to Nanu, who's CASA's Outreach and Education Manager. Thanks, folk.
Thank you, Sarah. So like Sarah's been saying, at CASA, we really do try to think about how can we reduce the barriers that face young people with precarious or no immigration status, and how can we create more equitable and inclusive societies at many different levels, right? But today we really want to focus on this question about how can we do that in the school setting? How can we do that in classrooms? And how can we create more inclusive, accessible, and supportive schools for young people in this situation? So kind of our approach has been just to think about this, but also be in dialogue with a lot of different stakeholders and learn from everyone as well, because it's not an easy question to answer, and we're really trying to refine our approach. So hopefully, you know, with our presentation today and with the chat box, we can learn from all of you as well and get your ideas and input. So our approach is also kind of twofold, right? We want to do we want to provide outreach and support directly to the young people who have precarious or no immigration status. So we want to reach them directly. But we also want to engage all young people in the school setting or in a classroom with this issue to raise awareness and to raise allyship as well. So we're going to try and break this presentation into two sections. We got one section on how can educators support these young people in their classrooms or in their schools, and how can educators incorporate this topic in their lesson plans in an engaging and curriculum linked way. Okay. But first off, just to kind of cover the basics, what is precarious immigration status? I think most of you are familiar with this concept, but just to give you the dictionary definition, it's precarious immigration status refers to individuals who are not citizens or permanent residents. So specifically anyone who doesn't have full legal status in a country. And there's many different state-defined legal status categories in Canada. I'm not going to get into all of them. It's very complicated, like Sarah was saying. The immigration system is a beast. But there's permanent residents, there's temporary foreign workers, there's refugees, refugee claimants, all sorts of things, tourists, visitors. And all these different categories, they also give you different rights and rules based on which category you're in. But having precarious or no immigration status means you're not actually recognized by the state that you're in, or you're limited in terms of your rights and participation in Canadian society. And there's also many different ways that someone can have precarious or no immigration status. And at CASA, our viewpoint is it doesn't really matter how someone got into this position, especially for the young people who we're working with. No matter how they've ended up with precarious or no immigration status, they all have the same needs for the same support and services. And another big point that we want to address is that status is not static. So immigration status can change. Someone can have legal status at one point in their lives and then have no immigration status later. And there's so many different pathways. You can imagine maybe someone is a refugee claimant and then their application is rejected, so now they don't have immigration status. But that's just one example out of many. And we also want to talk about who are young people with precarious or no immigration status. When we talk about this group of young people, who are we referring to? In our experience with the people that we're helping at CASA, we find that these young people don't always fit into this category of newcomers. They're not, in our experience, someone who is in an ESL classroom necessarily. They can be present in any and all classrooms. They often speak fluent English. They've been in the country for a very long time. They've been growing up here since they're very young. And chances are they've hidden their status, or they might not even be aware of their lack of status. And then an important note there just to address is that young people with precarious or no immigration status are actually able to attend elementary school and high school in Ontario, because in Ontario, children have the right to attend school, even if they or their parents don't have immigration status. In Canada, that is the law. But despite that being the rule, at CASA, we've seen that access and inclusion and education outcomes for this group of young people is still inequitable in a lot of cases. So to talk a little bit about the impact that immigration precarity can have on a young person, I'm going to pass it over to Danique Lavia, and she's going to share some of her own experiences with this issue as well. Go for it, Danique.
Yeah, so immigration precarity, it creates a lot of barriers for young people who are living without immigration status. Those things would include racism, social isolation, and lack of access to essential services such as healthcare. So for example, someone who doesn't have immigration status isn't able to access legal employment. We aren't able to access healthcare, and obviously we aren't able to go to post-secondary school. So at CASA, what we try to do is we try to look at how do these barriers manifest in school settings, and what do these impacts have on education outcome. And as someone who lived without immigration status and also went to school dealing with all of these issues, I can speak on some of these things. So going to high school and living without immigration status, I felt very uncertain and confused because I didn't know what would happen to my future. I was scared, obviously, because of deportation. I felt really isolated because I didn't have anyone to speak to, and I felt like I wasn't able to speak to anyone. And also certain things that were touched on in the chat, like feeling shamed, and also all of the stress that I dealt with. So as a youth moving into adulthood and having to graduate high school in a year or two, you feel just stress in general. But as someone who is living without immigration status, it's even more stressful, because when you have status, there are certain opportunities that you have, and there are certain options that you have that someone who doesn't have immigration status won't have. So things like when you turn 16, you're able to get your driver's license, you're able to apply to university, you're able to apply to college, and also you can apply to have financial aid. Someone who doesn't have immigration status isn't able to do any of those things. Also, I wasn't able to find a solid job or a legitimate job because I didn't have my SIN number. So in high school, there was like a new fresh school that opened up close to my neighborhood, and a lot of the students that I went to class with applied to get like a part-time job, but I wasn't able to apply to do that, and it kind of made me feel really isolated and also a bit scared because I was afraid that maybe students would start to ask, why did I choose not to apply? And either I would have to lie, or I would maybe get caught in a lie, which are really scary. And also not being able to apply to like job experiences that certain programs offered because I didn't have my SIN. I wasn't able to like be involved with sports just because I was afraid if I got injured, then I wouldn't be able to access healthcare because I didn't have OHIP. And just, I was afraid of joining any extracurricular activities in general, because I was afraid that maybe the leaders of these groups would ask for personal information. And this is something that I had already dealt with previously. So while it was like March break, I was about 13 years old, and I had joined this dance group, and it was just for March break. And on my first day, they told us that we all needed to bring our OHIP card so that they could take a photocopy of it. And obviously I didn't have OHIP, and I was afraid and also really sad because I couldn't continue. I did go home and tell my mom, and essentially she said that I should just make something up, tell them that she's gonna go travel, and she has all my documents with her, so I wasn't able to give it to them. But I obviously didn't want to lie, and so I just didn't end up going back, or it kind of left a bad taste in my mouth and made me not want to join any other extracurricular activities after that. So, and also my experience with access to education, like when you are someone who has precarious status, you're unable to access post-secondary. You can apply as a domestic student, so you have to pay for international fees if you do apply. But in high school, I wasn't aware that I was even able to apply. I didn't know that I had any pathways. And when teachers and guidance counselors would ask me, you know, why aren't you applying, or what schools are you thinking of applying to, I had to lie and tell them that I was just choosing to go and work for a couple of years, and then I would apply after, knowing that I had no idea what was going to happen to my future, or what kind of job I would be able to get after high school. And it's obviously really difficult to reach out for help because of fear of being exposed. You don't want to, you know, get deported. You don't want to put any of your family members at risk. You don't want to put yourself at risk. And obviously you just don't want people to know because of the shame around it. You know, you don't want to be judged. And also fear of not getting adequate help, because as was spoken about like just now, when you think about someone who is undocumented, or you think about an immigrant, they look a certain way, or you may think they have an accent, or they don't speak English, or they're in your ESL classes. You're not assuming that they're in your academic classes. And I was in academic classes. And so I didn't know if I told anyone if they would actually be able to properly help me. Yeah.
Thank you, Danique. Always, you tell that story so well. It's always heartbreaking to hear too. So thank you for always telling it and being part of this presentation in that way. I know I'm sure everyone has questions or comments about it. We will open the floor for questions for all of us at the end of the presentation. So you can save any questions until then, but also feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll return to them at the end. But just based off of Danique's experiences and stories, we're gonna kind of pose that question that we had at the beginning, which is, how can educators support young people with precarious or no immigration status in their classrooms or in their schools, right? What practices might help young people with precarious status feel safer or more included, or feel more access to things? Are there any practices that we can change? We tried to think about this, you know, how is inclusion thought of when it comes to other identities or factors? How does inclusion play out when we're thinking about other groups? And how can we expand those practices for people without status, right? So we're actually going to look at a couple scenarios that are pretty loosely based on Danique's experiences and what many other CASA clients have actually gone through. And we're going to try and think about how to best approach them. So I'm going to kind of read the scenario and I'm going to pass it over to Sarah to kind of work through it and how CASA has addressed these things, or how teachers can address these things. Sounds good? So scenario one, a young person named Jacob wishes he could be part of the soccer team at school, but as a young person without immigration status, he's worried about his status. So how might this person's immigration status be revealed? What practices kind of could implicate that? What could be changed? What could be added? What do you think, Sarah?
a young person told me that this happened to them just last week. They were telling me about this, and they were a pretty amazing soccer player. And it was interesting hearing what Danique said, that I think that knowledge of, if I enter a extracurricular, if I sign up for a thing, how do I know what questions are going to be asked of me? So I think as educators or youth serving folk, that sense of how can we give young people enough information up front that they can calculate the risk as they see it. So not just asking them on day one of a program, oh, where's your OHIP card, but telling them in advance, if you're going to be in this program, here's the things you're going to be asked. You're going to need some ID, you're going to need some OHIP, so that they can make their decisions before they have to leave a group in the middle of their friends. So this one, this young person explained to me that he'd played on the soccer team, was doing well, but then the soccer team did so well that they were heading to some kind of intramural or sort of inter-school competition, and that's when the field trip form came out, which is, I know from being a parent in the TDSB, and I suspect most school boards in Ontario have lots of questions on the field trip forms, including questions where we write down our children's OHIP numbers. So that was a barrier for him. He's like, not only am I worried if I get hurt that you won't take me to hospital because I don't have OHIP, but even just saying I don't have OHIP here on this form is going to suddenly expose me to lots of questions about why don't you have OHIP, which is going to lead to the discovery of the status piece. So I think one of the things from this is thinking as educators, when we are creating forms, or our school boards are creating forms, what is the information we actually need, and what is the impact of asking those questions on a whole bunch of kids, in our case particularly on kids with no immigration status. And I think it's a valid concern for this young person. I think, previously when the world was traveling a bit more, we certainly heard stories of young people who didn't join teams in case, they were going to travel into the States, or they got the opportunity to travel internationally and again, didn't have passports, didn't have status, or maybe could leave, but wouldn't be able to get back into the country. So I think in terms of extracurricular, thinking about those, what are we asking? Are we giving young people enough information up front? And are we creating opportunities that are inclusive, so the issue of OHIP or status, isn't going to blindside someone? But I'm interested to know if anyone else has any thoughts. I know that many of the forms come directly from school boards. Yeah, Maureen, I agree, because I know that you just get the forms, right? But, as a parent, I've filled in the OHIP question on my kids' OHIP cards for years on their field trip forms. I don't actually think that form is ever going to be used, right? If my kid needs to go to hospital, the school's probably going to take them to hospital, and then I'm going to have the conversation about the OHIP. So I'm not entirely sure that the information is necessary, or maybe I just don't get why they're asking the question. And are they going to exclude kids who say they don't have OHIP at the start, which I think for us would be a different question in terms of exclusion and inclusion. Does anyone have any questions about this scenario?
I kind of have a question.
Yeah.
Based off what Danique, you were saying, how after that one experience you had when you were 13, you were kind of turned off from even looking at extracurricular activities, right? So how can we even present these opportunities in a way that's like, hey, this is inclusive. You don't need to think about or worry about the same things that you might have worried about before, right? I think that's where it gets very challenging, and we're trying to work through that as well. What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, I agree, and I think that sort of ties into the next scenario. And I know maybe we could flip to this one.
Sure. So Janu is receiving excellent grades in grade 12. They're being encouraged by their teachers to pursue scholarships and apply to prestigious universities. Janu avoids these conversations because of their immigration status.
So I've been that person, the helpful adult in the room who sees wonderful potential in a student and is super eager, keen to encourage them to go to post-secondary. And that's the job of schools, right? Getting students ready and excited for life after high school. But certainly when I think about it now and reflect back, and some of the answers I got from young people, I wonder, what factors were leading to their answers. And there could be many, right? There's many barriers that young people face for going to post-secondary, but I certainly wonder now, was there a status issue here? And my questions really were actually creating a bit of trauma, the fact that I was asking them in the way that they do. So here, when I think about the excellent job teachers and guidance counsellors do about getting students ready for post-secondary and encouraging them, I think again that front loading of information. If you're applying, these are the kind of documents you're going to need. This is what happens if you have this kind of status. This is what happens if you don't have this kind of status, and sort of normalizing it by including the fact that different people in that class may have questions about their status, or they may have different statuses, and that may create different barriers or options for them for post-secondary. And at the start, sort of saying if you have questions about your status when you're thinking about post-secondary, there's options for you to be able to get some help and get some advice and sort of understand fully what the situation is. So I think that would be one of my suggestions here, like front-loading information and normalizing the fact that not everybody in that class is going to have status. I think one of the big things that we worry about is not trying to suggest that folk inquire. So the issue of immigration status is deeply personal and deeply private, and as Danique has spoken about, carries a lot of fear with it, and that fear is real. People are worried about CBSA or removal action for themselves or for family members. So we're not suggesting a situation where people ask about people's status unless that is a situation where the young person feels like they want to reveal that information. But then I think also making sure that counsellors, guidance counsellors and teachers know what to do if somebody does say that, and know that young people can be told there's options, you're not alone, we can get you legal advice, we can get you legal help, we can get you connected, you're entitled to that legal information separate from your parents, it'll be confidential if you speak to a lawyer, and you can sort of put yourself in a situation where you can understand what your individual options are and then decide what you want to do with it. So to me, this is all part and parcel. I think making sure that our educators understand that people without immigration status, they're treated differently by our universities and colleges. As Nanu said, all students in Ontario are supposed to be able to go to school up until the age of 18. There's issues that come up with fees, even for students under the age of 18, if they are here under particular statuses. But at post-secondary, there really is supposed to be no access without a study permit or without citizenship or PR. And without citizenship and PR, no access to OSAP, no access to most bursaries. So the things that we talk about all the time, right, when we're talking about post-secondary readiness, are suddenly off the table. In Ontario, there's currently one university that has an access program pathway for students with no precarious immigration status. That's at York University, and it allows students to apply into most undergraduate programs and pay domestic fees, still no OSAP. And usually no bursaries. And at CASA, we're working with other institutions to help them develop programs that are similar in nature. Slow going, but I'm hopeful that there'll be another couple sort of really thinking about how they can better serve this population moving forward as well. We're heading up to Queens actually this week to sort of further the conversations we've been having with them with an access program. Colleges, I don't know of any colleges that have access programs or access at all for students without a study permit or PR or citizenship, which is a real problem when you think about how important college education is and how many students this is exactly what they want to do. So I guess the other thing Danique sort of talked a little bit about is how hard it is when people ask, why aren't you doing that? Why aren't you going to university? And peers obviously do that, and teachers do that, because it's super interesting. What is everybody doing next year? So sort of, I think, creating a bit of space or holding a bit of space for thinking, I'm not entirely sure why this answer is coming. And just like I won't be prying on other factors that may be impacting a young person's decision or ability to go to university, this may be another piece there. So I think having resources that a young person can access without asking, for example, here I'm going to say information about accessing legal clinics and those kinds of things in offices so people can see them without having to ask, might be a good step as well. Does anyone have anything to add? I know I'm not a teacher, I know I'm not in your classroom, so I suspect the reality of how this unfolds for you might be really different. And I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts on this. Okay, and I see nothing in the chat, and I really do hope that it doesn't come across that I'm preaching here. I know it's a tough job encouraging young people, and I know that these conversations are super hard, and yeah, just trying to create a little bit more space for this uncertainty to exist within our school systems.
I was gonna say maybe just framing the question differently, like asking what are your options for next year? Do you feel like you have any options for next year? You know, what are your plans, versus just coming right out of the bat and asking, you know, are you going to post-secondary? Why aren't you going to post-secondary?
Yeah, thanks, Tonique.
Thank you. Yeah. Sorry, go for it.
Oh, good question, Scott. Yes and no is the answer. Yes, there is, but you have to know about it. York isn't going to tell you about it. So you sort of have to know about the program. Generally, you're going to be applying directly through York's normal system. So even if you're in grade 12, you're going to go through the OUH system. But then you have to know how to get hold of the coordinator of the Sanctuary Students program and ask to be in the program. So that's a huge problem, right? It's a huge problem. If you don't know, you're not going to ask. And the program runs really quietly. So I suspect if you asked anybody in admissions at York University about the program, most of them would give you blank faces. They don't know about the program. It runs small, and a lot of that is for security reasons. They're really careful about who knows what information about people's status, what administrative systems at York know about people's statuses, and try to keep that as small as possible. But I saw another question about posters. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And Nana will talk a little bit about the sort of work we will do next. Actually, maybe this is just a really good segue, Nana, to talk about the things we're trying to do in classrooms.
Yeah, to answer your question, yeah, we do. And I will send that out as well. I'm going to skip this in the interest of time. But yeah, that next piece is how can educators also kind of incorporate this topic in your classroom, in lesson plans, and engaging in curriculum-linked ways. And that's where our resources and our workshops come into the picture, because that's kind of what we've designed them to do. We kind of call them stealth workshops because while their purpose is also to address young people who have precarious or no immigration status directly and tell them about the resources and services that exist out there for them, we're also trying to create really engaging curriculum-linked workshops that fit into a teacher's lesson plan. And we're going to just share the list of workshops that we offer. It's we got something for grade 11 and grade 12 law, which is called Migration and the Law. And basically, it's an examination of immigration laws, the immigration system, and kind of analyzing those laws through legal principles and human rights lenses. We also have a workshop for grade 9 geography, but it also fits into grade 11 equity and diversity classes. That's an exploration of immigration history in Canada, immigration trends in Canada, and how these things have impacts on the social and economic sphere of Canada, and how immigration precarity is this thing that's kind of constructed socially as well. I do have some messages in the chat. Okay. Thank you, Marie. Another workshop is the Age-Based Milestones workshop, which is about age-based laws, rights, and responsibilities that impact a young person's life. So questions like, when can I withdraw from parental control, or when can I rent my own apartment, or there's some more fun ones too, but also, when can I consent to certain things? When can I consent or reject medical treatment? And that's a great fit for grade 10 civics and citizenship. And it also addresses young people without immigration status who might not know about their rights at certain ages as well. And then there's the Navigating Adulthood, which is good for grade 10 career studies. And that's helping young people learn about institutions and systems and how to develop personal agency through talking about government IDs.
Maybe I'll jump in a wee bit here. In terms of the workshop, there's two ideas, right? That we know that you're busy, we know you've got a curriculum that you've got to move through, and we know that it's important that, you know, any workshop or speaker that comes in is working for all of the students. So we're hoping our workshops do that. We're hoping that they have this stealth message for young people who may actually need help about immigration status. It's making them think, this is a thing, I'm not the only one. These people seem okay, maybe I can get some help if need be. And also, thirdly, trying to inculcate this inclusive atmosphere and conversation amongst all students about migration and allyship. So we do hope that it's not a matter of you thinking, I have a student here who this will be relevant for. We're happy to come to any class and just see if the workshop works for everybody, and perhaps there's a young person in there, or perhaps there's a young person there who has a friend that this information might be helpful for.
Exactly. And we will be sharing with OJEN sort of the online form of the process to book a workshop. It's very simple. So that will be sent out afterwards. But there's other resources that we're kind of developing and that are on the way, sort of lesson plans, curriculum resources, and sort of teacher resources on how to support a young person with precarious status. We'd love to share it with you all once they're ready. And also, if you'd like to be a part of, you know, helping design those things, we would love that as well. We have a mailing list that you can sign up for, and I'm just going to share the QR code if you want to scan that and join. But we'll also send this out after the presentation, so you can sign up that way as well. Give you a couple seconds if anyone is going to do that. But yeah, we're working on some exciting stuff.
You can just scan that with your phone on the screen, right, Nanu? Yes,
you can. Yeah, you can just put your camera up to it and it should scan it. I'm pretty sure most phones can do that now, but if not, we're going to send it out later anyways. I'm going to send it over to Sarah to talk a little bit more about other projects that we're working on that kind of fit into this
Thanks,
aspect.
Nanu.
Yeah.
So Nanu started this presentation talking about how we're trying to learn, we're trying to understand. So we have assumptions about what sort of legal needs are for young people without status. You know, I think we've got that in the bag. But this concept of understanding more about what their day-to-day reality is like and what is it like to navigate systems such as healthcare, or in this case, education. You know, I think we have some idea, but we really are trying to learn more. And we're trying to learn more about how that looks across the province. Is it a similar experience in Thunder Bay as it is in Hamilton or Toronto, for example, or in some of the smaller rural areas as well? And I think that's particularly the case if there are communities that traditionally haven't had a great deal of migration. It may mean that there's a lot less resources or a lot less knowledge in those communities that a young person can easily access. So we've got a couple of projects on the go. The first one is in partnership with OJEN, the Faculty of Education at U of T, which is really trying to understand the experience of young people with precarious immigration status along sort of items such as, if I have no immigration status, is it going to impact the classes I choose? Am I going to choose less academic courses? Am I going to choose courses without any sort of experiential option? Am I not going to do sort of leap ahead courses? Those kinds of pieces, so real academic things. Is it also meaning that I have different relationships with teachers or peers because I'm worried about revealing too much about myself or sharing information about my family, and how does that impact me at school? And does it also mean that I don't get involved in the same kind of extracurricular activities as my peers do, or I'd like to, for the reasons that we've really discussed in terms of worry about forms or worry about injury, or generally that sense of people learning too much information about me. So that study is going to be happening over the next 2 years. It's based initially in the GTA, but we're hoping that the information we learn from that will sort of be extrapolated across the province. The second big project we're doing is one that's just been funded by the Ontario Trillium Foundation, and it is got a terribly unwieldy name so far of the Equitable Education Access Project. It's a systems change project with the goal of this 6-year project to try to flip the switch from an exclusionary face, which we think our education system currently has for students without immigration status, to more of an inclusion base. And that's running straight from, kindergarten up to post-secondary, because we see here at the clinic many clients who are entitled to go to school getting turned away, either at school board international offices or at the front desk at school, or being asked for documents that they can't and have not and should not be asked for, but also don't have, or are being told that they can come, but yes, you have to pay international fees even at grade or high school. And then of course the whole post-secondary piece. So that project's actually in partnership with two Toronto-based organisations, S4, which is an organisation of young people with precarious immigration status who are advocating for better access to post-secondary education, and also the Black Creek Youth Initiative, which is a neighbourhood organisation in the Black Creek neighbourhood here in Toronto. That project, we have 3 partners, but we're really going to be looking to speak to a lot of folk and get their expertise and perspective. So we're just rolling that out now. We'd love, if anybody's interested in either of those projects, we'd really love to hear from you. We're also doing a fun project this summer, which is not really school-based, but really trying to not only offer these, fairly seriously toned projects, but also one that can offer our clients a bit of fun. We're doing a CASA art project with a professional photographer who's giving young people the chance to really speak to their experiences and the barriers as they see them, and have agency in how those topics are discussed and whose perspectives get considered when we're thinking about barriers and post-secondary access and precarious immigration. So that's happening this summer. So hopefully next year I will be inviting you to some kind of art exhibit for that. We also, for those of you based in Toronto actually, and also broader, we're having an event coming up soon, which is, it's a fundraiser, I won't lie, but it is going to enable you to be at a screening of a short documentary made by some TMU students that looks at a rather famous person who nobody realised was undocumented here in Toronto. It's called Undocumented. So that's going to be fun. It's on October 24th. We can send out some information about that as well. But I guess the question for you, particularly thinking about this, how do we talk about these topics in classrooms, and is it possible to, I see Rosalie's question. I'll keep going with what I'm saying and I'll come back to your question, Rosalie. Like, how is it possible to thread topics of migration and precarious immigration status into your courses? And I haven't seen a lot of resources about that. I know that some units or some courses have, particular lenses. I guess I'm thinking particularly of grade 12 law with a sort of an international lens, or civics in terms of who belongs and who doesn't, or careers in terms of what things are happening next for you, and obviously grade 9 geography, which has a migration unit. But all of these topics, right? All of these courses that are dealing with social justice and change and where do we fit and sort of evolving agencies, I think there's a place for them. But I am interested, would it be for you, would curriculum resources or units, or, because I'm here with OJEN, I say mock trials, would anything like that be helpful for you in terms of being able to talk about these topics in a sort of a thoughtful, intentional way in your classes? It was a long sentence, sorry.
And maybe while people are thinking,
Yeah.
I'll just read Rosalie's question out loud for everybody. Do we have a sense of total numbers, how common, e.g. how likely it is that there's a student in my classroom, recognizing that it probably varies between parts of the province?
Yeah, you've put your finger on it there, Rosalie. This is a population who don't want to be counted because it's dangerous. So there's actually no firm or agreed upon count of undocumented people in Canada or Ontario. I think it's fairly agreed on that the GTA in Ontario has a really large proportion of Canada's undocumented people without status. And I think, we sort of range it from 250 to 500,000 undocumented people who may be in Canada, some of whom are young people. So where they are spread, it's interesting. Increasingly, we're seeing young people in smaller urban centres coming to us for help. So places where I can't even find an immigration lawyer. So there's never been immigration work being done in that city. So it's always surprising to me where young people are, where families are. And I think, the cost of living in bigger cities is meaning that many immigrants or migrants are looking to smaller centres. even in Toronto, we had this conversation last week. If we were going to focus on schools to do outreach in, how would we know what schools to do it in? Because we don't know. we don't know. I think we do think it's, possibly linked to other barriers to success. So we're starting with low income neighborhoods more often. So I don't know, Rosalie. It's a hard one.
But a very good answer. And we have a few answers to the other question in the chat. So activities linked to curriculum. Sean said the case studies were great. And then Scott said the short answer is that yes, resources would be welcome. Short single lesson activities would be particularly welcome.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Maureen, yes, I'm just going to say yes. Any we know that you're here at OJEN, the group of you are here. We know that there's many teacher associations who are thinking about curriculum things, and many student support associations across the province. So we are looking to connect with as many of those as possible. So any ideas are really gratefully received. And I guess now I'll just say to Bryn, if it is that resources, it may be that perhaps we could have a go at that together, some kind of things that tie into your work and our work.
Yeah, no, that's right. I think we're definitely interested in that. And for now, I think Nanu is going to put together our kind of package of resources. And for those of you who missed it, we said it quite near the beginning, you will be receiving some resources from this session that we'll pass along to all of you as well. And then Maureen says, her second point is Indigenous students often have documents problems which limit their participation in education activities, of course.
Yeah, that's interesting, Maureen, right? So same problem, but different genesis of the problem. Yeah, I agree. I know that we've left you 2 minutes to ask us any general question, but if anybody does have questions for us, we're happy to try to answer them now, or for you to get in touch with us. We'd really love for this to be an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, if any of you want to pop your emails in the chat or otherwise, but we can also, if you want to direct your emails to us at OJEN too, if you've already got that saved in your account, we can always forward any of your questions afterwards as well. No problem with that. But yeah, did anybody else have any general questions before we sign off? I have a few parting words and some other things to link to. But if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat or the Q&A function. Sean says, when can we book workshops?
Yeah, Sean. I think we'll be sending you an email really soon, Sean. That's what I suspect, with the link.
Yeah, once the link's out there, you can book as soon as possible.
Yeah, and I think the other thing I'd ask is if we know you work at schools, we know you have a ton of colleagues, some of whom work in completely different departments than you. We'd love for you to share our information with them. We'd love if you are booking a workshop with us that you see if any of your colleagues want a workshop that same day as well, and we'll come out and see if we can work with as many students as possible. Our workshops are free, just so we know that. Excellent, thank you. Thanks, OJEN. Thanks, Bryn.
Yeah, it was really, really informative and interesting, and also a special thank you to Danique for sharing your story. I think that's really meaningful to hear it from somebody who's had that lived experience, and this isn't just some kind of academic exploration of how these issues involve themselves in people's lives, but to really hear it from somebody who's experienced that is, I think I can speak for everybody in saying that that's particularly meaningful. So thank you very much. It was an honor to hear your story. And thank you once again to Nanu and Sarah as well for joining us. We really appreciate you, and we really appreciate all the teachers who joined us today and other folks who joined us. Just a couple quick notes on our forthcoming schedule. Our Summer Law Institutes continue to progress on for the rest of the week. So tomorrow we've got our legal life skills session at 9:30, as well as OJEN new resources. So stay tuned for that. And then the afternoon tomorrow we have our tour of Osgood, which is always enlightening and should be particularly fun. I know Elise has some fun things planned for you. And then I also want to give a reminder that Thursday evening, it's in your schedule, and you can see it on our website. Maybe we can post a link to the SLA website, Christy, if you're able to do that. But Thursday evening, we have our Hux Kitely Awards, and it's nice to have Alan Hux here with us tonight too. So, or this afternoon, rather. So that's coming up on Thursday, and that's something we're all looking forward to, especially at OJEN. So make sure you join us for that. JP says, thank you. Thank you to everybody. Otherwise, I think if we can also just post the survey, if you all have a quick moment while this session is fresh in your mind to fill out the survey, that would be really appreciated from our part. I know every event you go to these days tends to have a survey associated with it, but it's really helpful for us. So we appreciate you taking the time to fill it out. And it looks like Christy has just posted the link in the chat. So maybe the folks from CASA, if you want to hang back, but the rest of you, if you can fill out that survey, if you've got the time, much appreciated. But other than that, thank you very much for coming. We really appreciate you being here. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Cheers.